The island itself, the Mont itself, is small. You walk around it, it's 1,000 yards round. It's 80 meters high, so, like 260 foot high. You add a church, the spire of a church, and an archangel on the top, and there's a wonderful photograph of the archangel. You're getting up to pushing 500 foot high. And so this kind of pyramidal vision is just the most beautiful place. And a schematic map where you'd come today, you'd come to a village which is sort of to the left here and not very interesting, sort of shops and car park and stuff. And you stop there and you're going to take a bridge, more of which later, across to the Mont, either by bus or on foot. And as you approach, it's getting bigger, closer, better. Wonderful thing to do. A few photographs to give you an idea of that setting. And if I may, I think I'll start top right here, because there we're seeing the Mont from the land. You're seeing that road and bridge that I was referring to. So we're taking the photograph from the land. We're looking north. We're seeing that other island. Do you remember Tombelaine? Just a mile to the north of the Mont Saint-Michel. And so we're looking north, and you're seeing how the whole thing is surrounded by water, and it's an island. That vision you get at the big spring tides 25 times a year, where even the road here is submerged. And if I imagine that I'm up here somewhere on that same day, but 6 hours later, and I look across from there towards Tombelaine, the vision I'd get is the photograph on the left. I'm looking across, all the water has disappeared, and I'm seeing Tombelaine. I'm seeing the bay, and that can go out up to 9 miles. Absolute madness. And to sort of underline the importance of the tidal phenomenon, do you know, I think I mentioned there are 3 rivers coming into the bay. At the periods of big high tides, of course, you got the water from the land trying to get out into the sea. But you got the sea trying to get inland. And those 2 currents are kind of going to meet, and the sea is going to win that battle of wills. But where they meet, a tidal wave is formed, and it funnels into the bay. And that's what the French call the masquerade, a kind of a tidal bore, And it's spectacular to see. Again, it's that period of the big spring tides, the big differential tides. Well, it's not that high, 4 or 5 foot at its height, but incredibly loud and incredibly, of course, powerful. This wave coming in. And it's amazing to see, as a geographical, as it were, meteorological or whatever phenomenon, but also for the fun people have with it. And you see surfers and stuff waiting for it to come in, and then they're going to ride that wave as far as they can, and up the river. And here you're seeing the kayaks doing just that. And then bottom left, so a word of caution for any vegetarians amongst you, but I mentioned how the grasses on those prés salés, the salt meadows, are salt resistant. It's what they call haliophyte. They don't like salt. That would be haliophile. They're resistant to salt, haliophyte. And but they've got a sort of a salty content. And anyway, if you put sheep on those meadows and let them eat the grass, you get the most tenderest meat you can possibly imagine. It is just an absolute luxury. Whenever I go to the mall, I stop off a butcher at Avranches on the way back and stock up for the freezer. And so if you go there, you'll see on a menu, for example, agneau, lamb, pré-salé. And pré-salé, it sounds as though it means pre-salted, but it's the pré, the meadows, the salt meadows lamb. So a tip for Epicureans. The age-old tradition, of course, is that you cross the bay on foot at low tide to get to the island, the Mont Saint-Michel. And I've put a photograph of a statue in Avranches, actually, in the museum there, a medieval statue of a pilgrim. The first known pilgrim, it's extraordinary, the first known pilgrim, a man, a Frankish monk, a man called Bernard. He made the crossing, but he'd actually done a lot more than that. He'd actually been in Jerusalem, but he's walking from, so pushing 2,000 kilometers, he's walking from Monte Gargano, and I'll mention that again, a shrine to St. Michael in Italy, on the east coast of Italy, across from Naples, that kind of level. He's walking up from there to the Mont Saint-Michel. And so the first known pilgrimage is by Bernard in 867. And more recently, below, you're seeing, I think actually this photograph was taken sort of 2018 on St. Michael's Day, the 29th of September. And here you've got this row of pilgrims going and crossing the sands to get to the Mont Saint-Michel. And when they're there, they'll be for a service of Thanksgiving. And in the church at the top, so it's retaining its original raison d'etre. There's a religious community to this day. And there they're holding a service in devotion of St. Michael and so on St. Michael's Day. And we'll be entering that church a little bit later in the presentation. That photograph, much more recent and in color, is sort of mirrored by this wonderful old end of the 19th century postcard there. If you do cross the bay, it's a wonderful thing to do. You'd have to arrange everything around it, tides and so on. But you'd also make sure you've got a guide. A specialist guide for the bay, not someone who's good at history like me, but somebody who knows the sands, knows how it all shifts. The bay, there are the three rivers coming into it. And with the big tides and with storms and things, the riverbeds shift in the bay. And when they shift, they leave behind, they'll straighten up and leave a bend that becomes an air pocket, that kind of thing. And when you walk across the bay on those kind of air pockets, it's like with a natural yogurt. If you've got a natural yogurt, it's kind of got a crust, and then you put your teaspoon into it, and boom, the whole thing goes wobbly. Well, it's a bit the same here. The sands will have a crust, and you break that crust, and it all goes sort of jelly-like wobbly, a bit trampoline-y actually, and you move a little bit, and you'll find yourself sinking back down into the sands. So it's not like a quicksand, but it's like these moving sands. And I took a photograph here. This is me taking the photograph, actually, and I remember the moment quite well. So I'm crossing the sands. We've got a guide, and we're playing around with this, and he's sort of teaching us how to. And most people are going up to, as it were, their ankles or their calves. And then we got this kid, and I remember him. He's sort of the coolest on the block and everything, and so he's going right up to his thighs. But the problem there is the sands are kind of setting. It's like sort of concrete setting around his legs, and he cannot get out. He cannot get out vertically. And so in a couple of minutes' time, what's going to happen is he's going to have to go forwards onto his stomach and be pulled out horizontally. And so his nice clean white t-shirt, he's no longer going to be the coolest on the block. But anyway, fun was had by all. Beautiful day. A really important point. The access to the Mont from the mainland, we've been talking about walking across the sands, but in the 1870s, they built a dike. They built a dike across, and so an earthwork causeway upon which they put a train and everything. And so you had, from the 1870s onwards, direct access from the mainland to the island, which of course in many ways is very practical. There were two major problems with that. The first, it's actually not the best photograph to illustrate it, but if you look bottom left, do you see, this is like 12 years ago or something, the cars, you drive along, park, go into the Mont, and off you go, and away to do something else. And that was, as I say, very practical, but aesthetically was absolutely appalling. And it's not looking too bad there, but there were times when this was like, a real kind of airport car park, with white buses and cars and everything everywhere, and just appalling. Your photographs were not great. So an aesthetic problem, but much more importantly, of course, the dike, the causeway, meant that for over a century, water was not circulating around the island, and the island was no longer an island, it was connected to the shore. And there was no circulation of water around, flushing the silt and so on out towards the bay. And that meant that little by little, these salt meadows were encroaching on the Mont. And had they done nothing, the Mont would have lost its status of an island, much sooner than you'd imagine, like in the 2030s. It would have been linked to the mainland. So there was a whole project developed very seriously with, sort of ecological implications being studied and so on and so forth. And basically they took down the causeway, keeping access open actually. So it was extraordinary how they did that. But anyway, they took down the causeway and built a new kind of high-tech bridge kind of goes round at an angle. And so you've got beautiful views of the Mont without seeing too much of the bridge. And in any case, the bridge is aesthetically non-obtrusive and not ugly, and it's quite a pretty thing. And so it changed the whole thing. And of course, putting this bridge on stilts across from the mainland to the island means that all of a sudden water can now circulate again. Another key part of the project, I won't go too deep into it, is in the Quenon River, the main river just behind. They replaced the dam with a special barrage, which you allow the high tide water to come in. And then as the tide's going out, you've retained the high tide water, and then you're releasing it in a measured way, creating, as it were, a flush around the island. And that has stopped and actually made recede by about 10 meters. The bridge was only opened in 2015, so it's not even 10 years ago. That encroachment of the salt meadows has stopped and is actually going back slightly. And so a very, very important part of the visit to the Mont Saint-Michel today. The Mont is an island again, and we get this incredible vision. So again, I'm back to a spring tide, looking from the land side, looking north. I'm seeing Tombelaine again in the distance. I'm seeing the Mont Saint-Michel, the village, and the Abbey Church and so on. At the top, do you see the road here? The road here is submerged. That's how I know it's one of these big tide days. You're seeing people waiting here. And actually, I think here too, and they're going to have to wait a couple of hours for the water to recede, for them to be able to cross on foot. You've always got a platform for a helicopter should there be a major disaster, but otherwise it's cut off these 25 times a year kind of thing. And it is just an amazing thing to see.